He stood alone in the dust, just a German shepherd with a twisted leg, trembling beneath the weight of every murmur rippling through the crowd. Not a single hand was raised, not one. They labeled him damaged, unrepairable, a waste of time. The auctioneer was seconds from moving on, from ending the moment when a man previously unnoticed quietly lifted his hand. No words, no show, just a single quiet motion that would ignite a chain of events nobody there could have predicted. What was it about that dog that reached into the shadows and pulled a stranger forward? And what truth did that man carry in his silence that made him walk toward the pain others turned away from? This isn't just a story, it's a journey, one of loyalty, healing, and a connection that may very well shift how you see the world. But before we dive deeper, like this video, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, we'd truly love to hear. The Billings livestock auction wasn't exactly a place known for second chances. Between the dust kicked up by restless cattle, the screech of iron gates, and the constant drone of buyers sizing up animals like machines, Grace didn't have much room to breathe. Yet something changed that day. Something subtle, something unspoken. It wasn't a roar or a prize bull that changed everything. It was the dog. He limped in through the side gate like a ghost trying to remember the light. A male German shepherd, his coat stained with mud and marked by time. One back leg dragged behind him as if it had forgotten its purpose long ago. His ribs pressed through thin fur, and a worn, rusted chain mark curled around his neck like an old memory he couldn't shake. He didn't bark, didn't beg. He just stood there, quivering but unmoving, as if he already knew his future would be decided by strangers who didn't care enough to learn his name. The auctioneer, typically a storm of energy, stumbled over his words. A few mutters broke through the stillness. "That one's finished. Not worth the cost of feeding." Probably bit someone. No offers. Not a glance of compassion. The silence wasn't out of respect. It was dismissal. To them, he wasn't a dog. He was a liability with lungs. As the auctioneer tapped his gavel, ready to move on and have the shepherd escort it out, a hand rose in the back of the crowd. It didn't wave or shout, just lifted, steady and sure, like it had always known this moment was coming. Heads turned, conversations paused. Nobody recognized the man. He wore a weathered leather jacket that looked like it had seen more miles than most of the trucks parked outside. His boots were caked in Montana mud, and silver streaked his temples. A faint scar traced down his jawline, like a road to a story never told. No name was given, no word spoken, but the slow nod he offered carried more weight than the highest bid. The gavel dropped. Sold. People blinked, baffled. Why him? Why that dog? Was it pity? An accident? Or something none of them could understand? The man made his way down the aisle, no hesitation in his steps. When the dog lifted his head, the man didn't falter. The shepherd stared at him, legs unsteady, but in his amber eyes something flickered, like a spark in dying coals given one last chance. The man knelt. He didn't grab, didn't pull, just rested an open hand gently on the dog's shoulder, steady, waiting. What happened next silenced the entire barn. The dog leaned in. Barely, but it was enough. He pressed his weight against the man's leg, slow and shaking, like he hadn't felt real human touch in years. No growl, no whimper, just stillness and breath. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it moved everyone who saw it. Someone caught it on video, a short, shaky clip of a broken dog and a quiet man meeting in the middle of chaos. The footage went viral, but it didn't capture the reason behind that raised hand. It missed the truth behind the man's silence and the role the dog would play in the days ahead, leaving everyone wondering how much hurt it takes to lead someone home. The road back was lined with rust-colored trees clinging to the final sigh of fall. The old pickup groaned over every pothole like it had complaints of its own. But Elijah Kane didn't speak. His hands stayed firm on the wheel, eyes fixed forward, though they flicked to the rear-view mirror often. In the back, the shepherd lay curled, eyes half-lidded but never truly asleep. Every bump sent a shiver through him, like the world might turn cruel again at any moment. But this wasn't the auction yard anymore, and Elijah Kane wasn't like the others. The cabin stood just outside Laurel, Montana, where pine gave way to silence. It looked forgotten, half swallowed by trees, the porch leaning at an angle that gave it character. Elijah had lived there for years, alone. No guests, no mail. Just an old stove, a woodpile stacked with military neatness, and a bed too used to solitude. He never brought anything back, until now. Elijah carried the dog inside like something fragile, like a relic he didn't want to disturb. The dog didn't resist, just shivered slightly, his breathing shallow, unsure if he was allowed to rest. Elijah laid him gently on a flannel blanket near the hearth, added towels, and coaxed the fire to life until the flames danced in the dim light. Still, the dog didn't close his eyes. That night, Elijah made a simple stew. The shepherd didn't eat, didn't move, just watched. His gaze followed every movement, especially near the stove, near anything sharp. It wasn't fear, it was muscle memory, as if someone had taught him long ago that silence could turn on you. Elijah didn't press, didn't call out, just sat across from him and spoke low, almost to the flames themselves. "Rook!" The dog's ears twitched. Not much, just enough to betray something. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. Elijah repeated, gentler this time. "Rook, that's your name now." The dog didn't respond, didn't reject it either, but something in the air shifted, like the wind outside had changed its mind about how cold to be. For hours, Elijah didn't move. No books, no sleep, just sat, watching firelight flicker across worn walls, while the dog stayed motionless, ever vigilant. When the fire cracked just right, Rook flinched. Elijah didn't speak. He only reached for another blanket and rested his hand near the bedding. Not touching, just close. Rook stared at that hand for minutes. Then slowly, like testing the pull of gravity, he shifted forward, until the edge of his paw brushed Elijah's fingers. No dramatic music, no fanfare, just two broken lives learning how to lean, just enough, towards something safe. Morning arrived with frost veiling the windows, the forest still holding its breath. Elijah didn't wake to barking, he woke to warmth. Rook had moved in the night, closer to the fire, closer to the man who hadn't asked anything of him. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start, and sometimes that's all that matters. Healing doesn't always scream its way in. Sometimes it slips through in silence, in the soft pad of paws on old floorboards, in a shared breath between a man and a dog who've both seen too much. And in the quiet agreement that maybe, just maybe, this cabin could be more than just a shelter for ghosts. The morning was still. Frost clung to pine branches like powdered silver, and inside Elijah brewed coffee strong enough to jolt the dead. But his focus wasn't on the mug. It was on Rook. The shepherd was curled tight by the fireplace, one eye half open, always alert, always unsure. Healing had a rhythm, and Rook wasn't quite ready to follow the beat. Elijah set down a bowl, soft chicken, rice, a bit of broth. Rook didn't stir until Elijah sat beside him, cross-legged on the floor. Then, inch by inch, like every motion had once been punished, Rook leaned forward and began to eat, but only because Elijah stayed close. He didn't eat like a desperate stray. Every few bites he paused, eyes flicking up to the man, bracing himself for the shuffle of boots, the sting of a shout, or a hand swinging the wrong way. The days crept forward, slow and quiet, but Rook's limp didn't fade. If anything, Elijah began to notice something worse. It was the third afternoon, after a cautious walk around the yard, when Elijah tried working through the mats in Rook's coat near his hindquarters. Then it happened. A single brushstroke near the back leg sent Rook into a panic. He spun, snarling, not in rage but raw fear. A deep, guttural growl surged from his chest, not meant to bite, just to say, "Don't." Elijah froze. The brush hit the floor. Rook scrambled back, legs shaking, tail clamped between his legs, heart pounding like a war drum. But Elijah didn't shout. He didn't approach. He lowered himself to the floor, slow and deliberate, and extended a hand. Open, steady, unthreatening. Palm up, waiting. Rook lingered at the rug's edge, body stiff as if his skin remembered pain before his mind could catch up. His eyes darted like he was trapped inside walls no one else could see. 10 long minutes passed. Then he crept forward, one wary step at a time, until finally his nose touched Elijah's outstretched hand. It wasn't trust, not yet, just weariness, a quiet surrender from a dog too tired to keep running from ghosts. Later that night, Elijah carefully traced Rook's body with his fingertips, checking the sore leg, when something new caught his attention. Beneath the coat, scattered across the skin, were small, round patches, burns, old and new, healed and raw, not accidents, not random. Someone had placed them exactly where a dog couldn't reach to lick or claw. Elijah's hands went still. His breath stuttered. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes did, darkening with something heavy. Rage, maybe, or guilt, or both. He didn't speak, just closed his eyes, grounding himself like a man trying not to detonate. Once the fire dimmed to glowing coals, Elijah opened a drawer beneath his bed and pulled out an old leather journal, worn, the spine splitting. He sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and began to write. Not for anyone else. Just a man trying to unburden what his back couldn't carry anymore. The words came fast, jagged, scattered names, places, half-formed thoughts. Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I stop it? Did I know? While he wrote, Rook whimpered in his sleep. Low cries, fragile yelps like he was trapped behind his own eyes. Elijah rose and knelt beside him, gently, whispering, "You're not there anymore." Rook's body jerked once, then stilled. The nightmare passed. The questions stayed behind like smoke after fire. Over the following days, more patterns surfaced. Rook startled at the rattle of a chain, bolted under the table when Elijah dropped a metal bowl. He didn't growl at people, but at uniforms. Even the shape of a badge could send him bristling. These weren't quirks. They were trauma embedded deep in his reflexes. Someone hadn't just hurt Rook. They'd rewritten his instincts. But there was something else. Something Elijah couldn't quite put into words. It was in the way Rook looked at him. Not with fear, not confusion. Something closer to recognition. Like he wasn't meeting a stranger, but remembering someone. Elijah felt it too. A stirring in his chest like memory, but older than that. Like this moment had already happened in another life. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a return. And whatever Rook had been running from, it wasn't only behind him. It might have been buried in Elijah's past too. The silence that wrapped around Elijah's cabin each night wasn't just peaceful. It felt loaded, like even the air held its breath. That kind of stillness doesn't come from calm. It comes from things left unsaid. And on one such night, the quiet broke. Not with thunder, not with wind, but with a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps at the door. Elijah didn't move at first. Neither did Rook, curled near the fire. Both lifted their heads at once, like old soldiers hearing a sound they'd trained to respond to. Elijah crossed the room. No words, just breathe. On the other side stood a man in a brown canvas jacket, a badge clipped to his belt. Deputy Marshal Lance Dwyer. Not a stranger, but no one Elijah would invite in for coffee either. "Evening," Dwyer said, voice hushed. "Sorry for the hour? Figured you'd want to know. There was a break-in out at the old Wilcox Ranch. Thought you might remember that place. You used to work horses out there, didn't you?" Elijah didn't reply, but Rook stepped forward. Quiet, protective. He slid between them, tail low, ears pinned. Not toward the deputy, toward the name. Wilcox, Dwyer noticed, said nothing. Just left a card on the table and tipped his hat before vanishing back into the night. Elijah locked the door. Bolt. Chain. Then he stood there for a long time, unmoving, the dog watching him like he was waiting for something to break. Later, Elijah grabbed a flashlight and headed out back to the shed. Rook followed, limp, barely noticeable in the cold. The door creaked open. Inside smelled like rust and regret. He went to the far wall, lifted a tarp, and uncovered a weathered wooden crate with iron corners. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a folded army patch fraying at the seams. A photo, Elijah much younger, standing beside a different German shepherd, similar but not quite the same, a scorched leather collar, and at the very bottom, sealed in a bag, a pile of receipts from old ranch jobs. Wilcox's name appeared more than once, but it was one signature in particular that made Elijah's hand curl into a fist. Rook stood in the doorway, eyes locked on the box, as if he already knew what lay inside. Elijah didn't sleep. He sat out front, Rook beside him. The silence between them was different now. Not the kind you choose, but the kind that chooses you. When the past doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. He couldn't bury it anymore. Not the name, not the shame, not the proof sitting on his kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Something started the day he lifted his hand at that auction. Not just a rescue, a reckoning. And every step after this wouldn't be about healing. It would be about truth. Because if Rook's nightmares had any clues, what happened at Wilcox hadn't stayed buried. By dawn, the frost on the roof melted in slow drips, ticking a rhythm against the gutters. But Elijah hadn't slept. The crate remained open on the table. Rook paced near the front door, paws tapping in a slow, restless rhythm. There wasn't a plan, nothing spoken, but somehow both of them knew where they were going. The road to Wilcox Ranch snaked through the edges of Custer National Forest. Pines crowded the sky, shadows stretching thin across gravel curves. Elijah drove without speaking. Rook sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching, eyes scanning the horizon like the trees might start whispering secrets. When the old ranch came into view, it didn't look abandoned. It looked evacuated. Fence posts leaning like they were tired of standing. Barns slouched under collapsed roofs. Windows empty-eyed and glassless. They didn't go to the front door. Rook veered off toward the rear fields, passing a rusted horse trailer in the ruins of a corral. His focus zeroed in on the clearing past the tree line. Wild, tangled grass and tall weeds. Elijah followed. Then Rook stopped, dropped his head, ears flattened. He sniffed the ground, pawed once, and looked up. There were shallow impressions in the dirt. Faint, forgotten, like someone tried to erase what had once been buried there. Elijah dropped to his knees, hand brushing the soil. "Is this it?" he whispered. Rook didn't bark, didn't whine, just exhaled a breath long and low, and sat beside him. The air thickened around them. Elijah shut his eyes for a long moment, dredging up memories he'd spent years burying. Old jobs paid in cash, a certain barn with sounds no one dared mention afterward. But it wasn't just guilt that settled into his bones. It was something worse. Complicity. He hadn't caused the suffering, but he'd been there, heard the noises, seen the signs, and walked away. Beside him, the dog leaned in, just barely, a subtle touch against Elijah's shoulder. Not pressing, just present. That quiet contact said more than words ever could. It was a kind of forgiveness Elijah didn't believe he'd earned. They stayed that way a while, man and dog in the middle of a haunted field, surrounded by shadows of the past. But stillness has a way of shifting. On their way back to the truck, a flicker of movement caught Elijah's eye near the barn. A quick darting shape vanishing behind rotted wood siding. Someone was there, watching. Elijah stepped forward instinctively, but Rook let out a low, throaty growl that stopped him cold. Whoever had been lurking didn't show themselves again. Elijah didn't push it. Instead, he popped open the glove compartment, retrieved a worn notepad, and scribbled 3 words. It's not over. The ride home was quieter than before, but now the silence had weight. It thrummed with urgency. This wasn't just about Rook's story anymore. It was Elijah's too. His past, his debt, the unfinished reckoning waiting in barns no one talked about and in ledgers that had been burned long ago. At the cabin, Elijah set the mud-stained notebook on the table and started assembling a list. Names from another life. Ranchers, auctioneers, men who smiled for the public and kept bloodied ledgers behind closed barn doors. Meanwhile, the fire cracked behind him, and Rook curled up on the rug, not facing the exit, but Elijah himself. No longer just 2 survivors. Now they were allies, a team. By morning, Elijah didn't waste time. He downed a few sips of bitter coffee, loaded the dog into the truck, and headed east, straight toward Bozeman. The miles passed under a sky that seemed too wide for what they carried. The old fence post from the Wilcox place, the ghosted shapes in the barn, the shallow earth, all of it still clung to Elijah. But the image that haunted him most was Rook crouched low in the grass, whimpering like the dirt itself had spoken. Bozeman came into view after about an hour. The terrain flattened, but Elijah's grip on the wheel only tightened. He hadn't stepped foot in this vet clinic in years, not since things with Alina Merrick had gone silent. But if anyone could read beyond broken skin and limps, it was her. The moment Elijah stepped through the door, the receptionist stiffened. "Dr. Merrick," she called without even asking his name. Then Alina appeared, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, hands drying on a stained towel. She didn't greet him. She didn't ask why he was there. Her gaze dropped immediately to the dog. Rook walked in behind Elijah and sat, body rigid, eyes flicking between the 2 humans, like he was decoding something complex. Alina moved slowly, crouched near him, and extended a hand. Rook didn't recoil. That alone said everything. "Elijah," she finally murmured as she stood, "let's have a look." In the sterile exam room, the atmosphere changed. Rook stayed still as she checked his paw, traced his ribs, but when she gently parted the fur along his flank, she froze. "These aren't from barbed wire," she muttered. "These were done on purpose." Elijah's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She didn't look at him. Her fingers moved over the marks with clinical precision. Old scars, circular, burn patterns. She shifted to his chest and found more. "This kind of pattern, it's from shock prod," she said softly. The words fell into the room like stone into still water. Elijah's breath slowed. His hands curled on his knees. He'd heard of it. Rumors about how dogs were trained on backcountry ranches. Fear was the leash, pain the command. Obedience bought with suffering. Alina stepped back, visibly shaken. He wasn't just abused, he was conditioned to survive something he never should have had to. Then she checked the scan. A pause, a flicker of light on the monitor. "There's a chip," she said, "and it's still active." They both leaned in. Data pulled from some dusty archive. Then a name appeared. Alina hesitated before reading it. Rook had once been registered under a livestock facility Elijah knew all too well. Yellowstone County Holding, closed 5 years ago. and linked to a name that cracked the air open. Owner of record, Everett Roar. The moment shattered something inside Elijah. He sank back, staring at the screen like it had betrayed him. Roar, the man behind the auctions. The man Elijah had once worked for when everything in his life had gone dark. The man he had tried to forget, but Rook hadn't forgotten. The dog looked at him, not with blame, but something worse, understanding. You already knew, his eyes seemed to say. Alina stayed silent. She didn't need to speak. She could see the storm unraveling Elijah from the inside out. He stood, walked toward the door, then paused. Keep the scan. Don't erase anything. Outside, the wind had risen. Elijah stood by the truck, head bowed, whispering a name, a place, a promise. Because this wasn't just about saving one dog anymore. It was about making damn sure no more ended up in that same nightmare. That night, sleep didn't come. The name on the registry, Everett Roar, echoed through his mind louder than the silence around him. Roar wasn't just a ghost from Elijah's past. He was the architect of something vile. A door Elijah had bolted shut with every ounce of shame he had, now blown wide open. By sunrise, Elijah sat on the porch, lukewarm coffee in hand. Rook lay next to him, head resting on Elijah's boot. Still, watchful, connected. The bond had deepened. This wasn't a rescue anymore. It was testimony. Elijah stood, went to the shed, and pulled out a box he hadn't touched in a decade. Inside were pieces of a man he used to be, contractor IDs, photographs, a paycheck stub with Roar's name typed across the top. Proof, not for court, but for conscience. He'd worked under Roar, shoeing horses, mending fences, but the jobs were just cover. He remembered the sheds that were always locked, the dogs that came but never left. He'd seen it, heard it, and walked away. And now the monster had followed him to Bozeman. He called Deputy Marshal Lance Dwyer. The conversation was short, no explanations, just a time and a place. They met at a quiet diner tucked in the corner of town. Elijah laid it all out. No excuses, just the truth. I knew Roar. I worked under him. I saw what was in those cages. Dwyer's expression barely shifted, but his eyes hardened. Why now? Elijah didn't answer with words. He handed over a copy of the scan, the photo from the registry. Rook, younger, scarred, standing in a wire pen with a number behind him. You bought him, Dwyer said. Elijah nodded. Didn't know who he was, not then. Dwyer ran a hand across his beard. Roar vanished after the co-op fell apart. No address, no paper trail, just gone. Elijah leaned forward. I can find him. The lawman didn't ask how. He just nodded once, slow. If you do, he said, don't be stupid. Elijah offered a half smile. Too late. Back at the cabin, Rook was already at the door before the truck even stopped. He stood, waiting, not for permission, but for movement, because now it wasn't just about healing, it was time to settle accounts. The next morning, Elijah packed light. Rope, first aid, flashlight, an old revolver he hadn't touched in years. Rook jumped into the truck without hesitation, like he'd done this before. Maybe in another life he had. They didn't exchange a single word on the way out of town. They didn't need to. The wind threading through the trees carried every unspoken thought loud and clear. Everett Roar had ruled through silence and suffering, but now silence was coming back for him, carried by a dog with scars and a man with a past too long buried. The drive back to the Willocks Ranch was wordless, but it said everything. The dog sat tall in the passenger seat, eyes locked forward like he already knew the road and its end. Elijah's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, his jaw clenched in that still, simmering anger only those with years of guilt truly understood. The past wasn't behind them anymore. It was circling, close now, hungry for resolution. Clouds gathered above the timberline as they made the turn near the old Custer border. The ranch gate sagged on one hinge, rusted and half-eaten by time. Elijah didn't shut the engine off, just parked, hands lingering on the keys like he was steadying himself. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. The dog stepped out first, limping but alert, his nose close to the ground, ears twitching at every sound. Elijah followed without a word. Through splintered fence posts and past the burned-out stall where no animal had lived in years, they moved like they were retracing footprints only they could see. And then they reached it, that same clearing. The dog didn't cry this time. He just started digging. Elijah dropped to his knees beside him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The soil shifted, and Elijah's hand struck something solid. A small metal box, edges corroded, wrapped in damp, disintegrating cloth. He hesitated, heart pounding like war drums in his chest, then flipped the lid. Photographs, dozens of them. Dogs in cages, dogs scarred and broken, dogs who never stood a chance. Beneath the photos were documents, receipts, handwritten ledgers, auction slips. There was a notepad scrawled with codes and dates, and beneath that, a list. Names. Elijah's breath caught when he saw his own. Next to it, shoeing/transport. No questions. He almost dropped the box, but the dog nudged the edge with his paw again, scraping something loose. Another photo slid free from the bottom. This one hadn't aged. Clear, sharp. The dog, leaner, younger, eyes just as sharp. A chain across his chest. Kennel tag 1479 nailed to the background like a grave marker. Elijah looked down at him. The dog met his gaze. No anger, no blame, just knowing. And maybe, finally, release. Elijah's hands trembled as he packed the contents into a canvas satchel. They left the ranch in silence, but this silence was different. It had weight, direction. In Bozeman, Elijah walked into the sheriff's office with the dog by his side. Dwyer was already at the door, reading Elijah's face before he even spoke. "This is everything," Elijah said, placing the bag on the desk. By nightfall, the hunt for Roar had reignited. His name lit up old case files. Warrants hit satellite networks. Agencies reopened sealed folders. What once festered in the dark now stood in full daylight, and no one could ignore it. The next morning, snow dusted the streets of downtown Bozeman. Elijah and the dog stepped out of the station. People stopped. A few recognized them, from the viral auction footage, from whispers in town. No one spoke. They just watched as the man and the dog walked down Main like they belonged. Elijah glanced at Rook. "You ready to go home?" The tail wagged just once, but they didn't head to the cabin. Instead, they turned toward a new place, a patch of land Elijah had kept quiet about, just outside Livingston. A sanctuary, a promise. No cages, no chains, just fields and freedom. Rook would be the first to run there. Not just a survivor now, but a sentinel, a soul who'd return to help others heal. Because some stories aren't about how you escape. They're about how you come back, how one scarred soul can lift another until neither remembers who saved who. And as for Everett Roar, he's on the run. But this time, he's being hunted. Elijah and the dog never looked back. They didn't need to. They'd already turned their pain into purpose. And somewhere behind them, in the wind threading through the pine, the past finally let go.